Marcus Hale was 39 years old, and for 11 years he had been the quiet foundation beneath everything his wife believed she had built on her own. To the world outside, he was a civil engineer who drove a muddy F-150, wore steel-toed boots to Sunday dinners, and kept a worn leather notebook in his back pocket at all times. His name was not on any marquee. His face was not in any magazine. He attended his wife's charity galas and stood near the cheese table and shook hands and smiled and said very little. And her colleagues assumed he was the kind of man who had married above himself and knew it. His wife, Claudette, had filed for divorce on a Tuesday morning without telling him first. She had simply handed him an envelope at breakfast, slid her chair back, and walked out to her car. Inside the envelope was a petition demanding the dissolution of their marriage, full custody of their daughter, and a claim against 40% of what she called his modest assets. Her attorney, a man named Garrett Finch, had sent a separate letter that afternoon informing Marcus that they intended to pursue $380 million in what Finch described as undisclosed marital estate concealment. $380 million. Marcus had sat at the kitchen table with both letters and a cup of coffee, and he had not moved for a long time. What Claudette had never asked, not once in 11 years of marriage, was why a civil engineer with muddy boots and a beat-up truck had a standing Thursday lunch with a federal judge named Everett Hale, his father. What Garrett Finch had not thought to verify before he walked into that courtroom and made his demands in front of a packed gallery was the last name of the man sitting behind the bench. What happened next would cost Finch his license, cost Claudette her carefully constructed story, and cost them both everything they had spent 2 years planning to take. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning light came through the garage windows in long, pale strips, falling across the workbench Marcus had built from reclaimed oak the year they moved into the house. He had designed the bench himself, mortise and tenon joinery, no screws, the way his father had taught him on weekends when Marcus was 11 years old, and the lessons were never really about wood. He was sanding the legs of a chair that belonged to his daughter's room. She was 7. Her name was Renata. She had asked for a reading chair, something small and just hers, and Marcus had promised her by her birthday, and he did not break promises he made to Renata. The envelope from Claudette's attorney was still on the kitchen counter. He had not touched it since the night before. His father had told him once, standing over a workbench not unlike this one, "The man who builds quietly never has to explain what he made." Marcus had written it in the leather notebook he still carried. He had not fully understood it at 22. He understood it completely now. He set the sandpaper down and wiped his hands on a rag and thought about Claudette. They had met at a conference in Charlotte 13 years ago. She was a rising healthcare administrator with sharp instincts and a laugh that filled a room. He had been finishing a complex drainage infrastructure project and attending the conference on behalf of his firm. She had approached him first, curious about the notebook, and he had told her he kept track of things. She had smiled and said she liked men who paid attention. He had believed, for a long time, that she meant it. The early years were good. He had told himself that for a long time, and it was true enough. They had built a life together on a quiet street in Charlotte, a brick house with a wide porch and an oak tree in the backyard that Renata had already claimed as her own. Claudette's career had grown fast, and Marcus had been glad for her, genuinely glad. The way a man is glad when someone he loves becomes more fully what they are meant to be. He had not paid close enough attention to when the gladness stopped being mutual. Looking back, he could mark it. About 3 years ago, her calendar became private on the shared app. Small thing. Then the weekend conferences grew more frequent. Then a new perfume she never mentioned buying. Then a second phone she explained away as a work requirement, though her employer had never issued secondary devices before. He had noted each thing. He had not said anything. He was an engineer. He understood load-bearing. He knew the difference between a hairline fracture and structural failure, and he had not been ready to name what he was seeing as the latter. The chair leg was smooth now under his palm. He picked up his coffee, walked to the back door, and looked out at the oak tree in the early light. Renata would need that chair by the weekend. He would finish it. The discovery did not come as a single blow. It came the way water damage comes, first a stain on the ceiling, then soft drywall, then the hidden rot you only find when you press your hand against the wall and something gives. It started with a conference registration in Nashville. Marcus had been reviewing the joint account for a quarterly expense summary, a habit he maintained from the early years of the marriage. And he found a hotel charge for 2 rooms booked under Claudette's name at the same property on the same weekend. 1 room for her, a second room billed to a supplementary card she had not disclosed on their most recent financial statement. He did not say anything to Claudette that night. He opened the leather notebook instead. Over the following 3 weeks, he gathered what an engineer gathers: measurements, documentation, corroborating data. He reviewed 2 years of financial statements and found a pattern of secondary charges at restaurants he had never been to, hotel properties in 4 cities, and a recurring monthly transfer of $1,100 to an account under a name he did not recognize. He ran a search on the name. It belonged to a holding company registered in Delaware, listed at an address that resolved to an office suite service with no physical occupants. He photographed the statements. He copied the account numbers into the notebook. He noted the dates, cross-referenced them with her travel calendar, and found a clean match on 19 separate occasions. On a Thursday in October, he arrived at his father's house for their standing lunch. Everett Hale had been a federal judge for 16 years. Before that, he had been a civil litigator for 22 years. He had the kind of face that looked carved rather than aged. And he moved through rooms the way men move who have spent decades understanding that stillness projects authority that motion cannot. He looked at Marcus across the table and said, "You have something to tell me." Marcus slid the notebook across. His father read for a long time. He did not ask questions. He turned the pages carefully, the way he reviewed briefs, and when he was finished, he closed the notebook and set it down and looked at his son. "You haven't confronted her?" "No." "Good." His father leaned back. "Don't." He told Marcus to call a family law attorney named Patricia Wen, who had handled complex asset cases for 30 years and whose reputation was for precision. Not aggression. Precision. Marcus called her that afternoon. She met him at her office on a Friday morning with 2 associates and a yellow legal pad. She reviewed the financial documentation without expression, and when she finished, she looked at Marcus and said, "This is 2 years of calculated concealment. She has been preparing to leave for longer than you know." Marcus nodded. "Tell me what she doesn't know about your assets." He told her. Patricia Wen did not change her expression. She wrote for a long time. What Claudette knew was the joint account, the modest salary from his engineering firm, and the value of the house. She had seen those numbers. She had built her calculation on those numbers. She had shared those numbers with Garrett Finch, who had used those numbers to construct the demand letter, and who had filed those numbers with the court. What Claudette did not know was the rest. She did not know about the infrastructure investment trust Marcus had built over 14 years through a holding company incorporated 18 months before they met. She did not know about the equity stake in a water management consortium that operated in 6 states. She did not know about the land holdings in Virginia and Tennessee that had been in the Hale family for 2 generations, and had appreciated in ways that land appreciates when no one is watching it and no one touches it for a long time. She had never asked. Not once. Patricia Wen looked at her notes and said quietly, "They've accused you of concealing a modest estate. What they've actually done is hand us a discovery process that will require full financial disclosure from both sides." She let that sit. "They have asked for everything," she said. "We will give it to them." Marcus drove home. He pulled into the driveway and sat in the truck for a moment and looked at the house, the brick and the porch, and the oak tree in the back that he could not see from the front but knew was there. Real power operated in quiet rooms. Over the next 6 weeks, Marcus did nothing that Claudette could see. He finished Renata's chair and put it in her room and watched her climb into it with a book that evening and say nothing except to curl her legs under her in that satisfied way children do when something fits exactly right. He attended 2 dinner parties with Claudette, stood near the edges of conversations, and said little. He was polite. He was present. He shook the hands he was supposed to shake and asked the questions that were appropriate to ask, and did not look at his wife any differently than he had for years. At his attorney's office, work continued. Patricia had engaged a forensic accountant named Dwight, a compact, quiet man who had spent 20 years unraveling financial structures for litigation purposes. Dwight moved through the Hale financial records with the thoroughness of a man who did not believe in assumptions, only in documents, and within 3 weeks he had produced a complete asset disclosure that Patricia filed with the court as their formal response to Garrett Finch's petition. The filing was sealed, as both parties' financial disclosures were, pending the hearing. Marcus also met twice with his father. Everett Hale listened more than he spoke. On their second meeting, he set down his coffee and looked at his son and said, "You understand what's going to happen in that courtroom." "I do." "Finch is going to come in loud. He believes the paper he has. He will not have looked past the name on the bench until he's already standing in front of it." Marcus said nothing. His father picked up the coffee again. "I'll have nothing to do with the case. I'll be on the bench because it was assigned. The moment there is any question of appearance, I'll recuse." "I know, but he'll have one moment." His father looked at the window. One moment where he understands what he walked into. Marcus thought about the notebook. He thought about the chair he had built for Renata, the mortise joints he had cut by hand, the way the wood had come together without fasteners because the geometry was right and the craftsmanship was sufficient. He thought about what his father had said about building quietly. "I just want it done correctly," Marcus said. His father nodded. "It will be." The day before the hearing, Marcus drove to the house he had grown up in. A frame house on a tree-lined street in southwest Charlotte that his mother had kept for 40 years and that still had her curtains in the windows. She had been gone for 6 years. He sometimes went there to think. He sat on the front steps for a long time. He did not feel triumphant. He felt the way a man feels when a structure he has been watching for a long time finally reaches the point he knew it would reach. Not surprised, not pleased exactly, just accurate. He drove back to Charlotte in the dark and slept better than he had in months. The courtroom was full. Claudette's attorney, Garrett Finch, was a tall man with silver at his temples and the practiced ease of someone who had won enough cases to believe that winning was his natural condition. He wore a dark suit and carried a leather portfolio, and exchanged murmured words with Claudette at the plaintiff's table with the manner of a man who had already rehearsed the outcome in his head. Marcus sat beside Patricia Wen and did not look at Claudette. The clerk called the court to order. Everett Hale entered from the side door and took the bench. He was a large man, deliberate in his movements, with the kind of stillness that filled a room without announcing itself. He set his materials down and surveyed the courtroom from behind reading glasses and said nothing for a moment. Marcus watched Garrett Finch register the name on the placard. The Honorable Everett Hale. Marcus watched the stillness cross Finch's face, the small recalibration, the invisible calculation running behind his eyes. Finch looked at Marcus. Marcus met his eyes and said nothing. His father spoke. "This is the matter of Hale versus Hale. Counsel, are both parties ready to proceed?" Finch stood. His composure had returned, or something that looked like it. "Yes, Your Honor." Patricia rose. "The respondent is ready, Your Honor." Finch made his opening. He was still polished, still measured, but something in the room had shifted, and everyone present could feel it without being able to name it. He presented the petition, the financial summary his client had provided, the basis for the $380 million claim. He used the words "undisclosed estate" with confidence. Patricia rose when he finished. She presented the respondent's financial disclosure, which Dwight's report had compiled across 64 pages. She walked through the investment trust. She walked through the consortium equity. She walked through the land holdings. She presented the formation documents for Marcus's holding company, dated to 18 months before the marriage, and she noted the filing date clearly for the record. She then presented the forensic account of the funds that had been transferred out of the joint marital account over 26 months, 19 occasions. Total amount, $243,000. She presented the hotel records, the secondary card statements, and the Delaware Holding Company registration. She said evenly, "The respondent does not contest the dissolution of the marriage. The respondent requests full asset accounting, return of the transferred marital funds, and primary residential custody of the minor child, consistent with the evidence before this court." She sat down. The courtroom was quiet. Claudette leaned toward Finch. Marcus did not watch them. He was looking at his father's face, which had not changed at all, which was the face of a man who had spent 4 decades reading rooms and already knew what everyone in this one was about to understand. Finch requested a recess. It was granted. In the hallway, Claudette found Marcus near the water fountain. She was alone. Her composure had slipped in a way that made her look smaller, and Marcus recognized with something that was not satisfaction but was adjacent to it, that this was perhaps the first unperformed moment she had shown him in 3 years. She said, "You knew." "I kept good records," Marcus said. "You let me walk in there." "You handed me an envelope at breakfast," he said, without a conversation, without a word. She looked at him for a long time. "I needed you to be smaller than you were," she said finally. He looked at her, and he did not feel anger. He felt the precise weight of an accurate sentence. "I know," he said. He walked back into the courtroom. The hearing concluded that afternoon. His father recused himself at the point of formal ruling, as he had said he would, citing the relationship to the respondent and requesting reassignment. The record was clear. The process was clean. The recusal was noted and honored. The assigned judge who completed the ruling did so 3 weeks later. The marital dissolution was granted. Primary residential custody of Renata was awarded to Marcus, with structured visitation. The transferred funds were ordered returned in full. The asset claims against Marcus's holdings were dismissed without prejudice, as the financial records showed clear premarital provenance. Garrett Finch's license was not suspended that day. But the bar complaint Patricia filed based on the evidentiary record of his conduct in advancing claims he had not adequately investigated, would take 14 months to resolve. It did not resolve in his favor. Tools were meant to work, not shine. 14 months later, Marcus was sitting on the back porch of the brick house when Renata came through the door with a book and settled into the reading chair he had carried outside for the afternoon. She was 8 now. She tucked her legs under her in the same way she always did and opened her book without saying anything, because she was a child who had inherited his ease with silence. The oak tree cast its shadow across the yard. The house was his entirely now. He had renovated the kitchen himself over the summer, retiling the floor with a pattern that his mother had once kept a photograph of in her kitchen drawer. He had found the photograph after she passed, and he had kept it in the notebook for years without knowing what he would do with it. Now he knew. He heard a car in the driveway, and a moment later his neighbor Adele appeared at the gate, carrying a covered dish because she had been making Sunday dinners for herself and for Marcus and for Renata for 6 months now, ever since she had knocked on the door one evening to return a borrowed ladder, and they had talked on the porch until the stars came out. She was a structural designer. She kept her own notebook. She said something to Renata, who looked up and smiled, and then she carried the dish to the porch table and looked at Marcus and said simply, "Smells like rain later." "Probably," he said. She sat in the chair across from him. Claudette had moved to Atlanta. The story of the courtroom had spread through their circle. In the way those stories spread, quietly and thoroughly, and the professional relationships she had cultivated with such care had reconfigured themselves around a woman who had been publicly revealed as someone who had concealed and calculated and then overreached. She was working again, in a smaller capacity, in a city where fewer people knew her name. Marcus did not follow her progress. He noted, on the occasions when mutual acquaintances mentioned something, and then he let it pass. Finch had no longer been practicing as of 4 months ago. Marcus did not think about Finch at all. Renata turned a page. The light in the yard was the particular gold of late afternoon in October. The same light that had been coming through his mother's windows for as long as he could remember. The light that said, "The day has been good, and the evening will be better." He picked up the notebook from the table and wrote the date at the top of a clean page, and then set the pen down, because there was nothing that needed to be recorded tonight. Everything that mattered was already here. Bitterness required ongoing emotional investment in people who no longer deserved it. He did not have any to spare. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.